They thought firing me would be the end of my story. What they didn't know was that I had already written the ending. My name is Rowena Chase, and for nearly 2 decades I was the invisible backbone of Virex Systems, a company that proudly called itself a leader in enterprise infrastructure. They celebrated innovation, scalability, disruption, all the buzzwords that sound impressive in boardrooms. But behind all of it, behind every seamless transaction, every stable deployment, every crisis that somehow never happened, there was me. I never needed recognition. I built systems, not spotlights. But everything changed the day Adrian Keller walked in. He was the new CEO. Young, sharp, polished, the kind of man who spoke in rehearsed confidence and smiled like he already owned the room. Within weeks, he started restructuring everything. Departments shifted. Teams dissolved. People disappeared quietly. I knew what that meant. Still, I didn't expect what happened next. Before we continue, please take a moment to like and subscribe to the channel, but only if you genuinely enjoy it. And please let me know where you're listening from and what time it is where you are. I'll read all the comments. Okay, now back to the story. Monday morning, 9:40 a.m. I walked into the executive conference room carrying a system audit I had spent my entire weekend preparing. The room was already full. Senior leadership sat around the glass table, their expressions carefully neutral. At the head sat Adrian. To his right was Elena Ward, my former mentee. I had trained her from scratch years ago. I still remembered the nights we stayed late debugging her first deployment, the way she used to second-guess every decision until I taught her how not to. Now, she wouldn't even meet my eyes. Rowena, Adrian said, folding his hands like he was about to host a press conference. Let's not make this longer than it needs to be. Something in my chest tightened. He didn't pause. As of this moment, your position at Virex Systems is being terminated, effective immediately. No one gasped. No one spoke. The silence wasn't empty. It was deliberate, controlled. Like everyone in that room had already agreed this moment would happen, just not out loud. I stood there still holding my notes, waiting. Not for him to take it back, I knew better than that. I was waiting for someone to look at me. No one did. Adrian slid a sealed envelope across the table toward me, smooth and casual, like he was paying a dinner bill. Your severance package is outlined here. HR will assist you with your transition before noon. Transition. That word almost made me smile. I didn't sit down. I didn't touch the envelope. Instead, I placed my access badge gently on the table and looked directly at him. His expression didn't change, not even a flicker. Understood, I said. My voice was calm, steady, too steady, because unlike everyone else in that room, I wasn't surprised. Months ago, when I first saw the signs, the restructuring, the subtle power shifts, the quiet removal of people who no longer aligned with leadership vision, I prepared. Not emotionally, systemically. What Adrian didn't know, what Elena didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Virex Systems didn't run on their strategy. It ran on something I built. And the moment my credentials were revoked under hostile conditions, that system had already begun responding. I turned and walked out of the room, past Elena, past the people who used to call me indispensable. No one stopped me. No one spoke. The door closed softly behind me, and that's when it happened. Not relief. Not anger. Something colder. Something precise. As I stepped into the elevator and watched the doors slide shut, I finally allowed myself a small, quiet smile. Because at exactly 9:40 a.m., what you just heard was the emotional truth. The rest will contain some fictional elements and use AI to clarify the lesson and the underlying emotions. Hopefully, this resonates with you. If not, please allow yourself to rest early. The elevator doors opened into the lobby with a soft chime, as if nothing had happened upstairs. People moved as usual, phones in hand, conversations, half-finished footsteps echoing across polished floors. No alarms, no urgency. Just another Monday morning inside a company that believed it was still in control. I walked past the reception desk without slowing down. No one stopped me. No one noticed. That was the irony of it all. After 18 years of holding everything together, my absence didn't create a scene. Not yet. Outside, the air was colder than I expected. I stood there for a moment, letting it settle into my lungs, grounding myself before reaching into my coat pocket and pulling out my phone. I didn't call anyone. I didn't open my email. Instead, I accessed something far more important: a private dashboard. Minimal interface. No branding, no company logo. Just a clean terminal with a single line of status text: Sentinel active. Most people at Virex Systems had never heard that name, and the few who had never understood it. Years ago, when I first joined the company, their infrastructure was barely holding together. Systems overlapped. Data leaks were constant. Vendors were pulling out. It wasn't just inefficient, it was unstable. They didn't need innovation. They needed survival. That's when I built Sentinel. Not as a product, not as a feature, but as a silent layer, something that could sit between every transaction, every process, every fragile connection, and make sure nothing broke. It didn't ask for attention. It didn't fail. It simply worked. Over time, Virex grew. Deals came in. Investors followed. Leadership took credit for strategic transformation. But Sentinel remained exactly what I designed it to be: invisible. What they never realized was where it actually lived. I didn't embed it directly into their core systems. I never trusted internal politics enough for that. Instead, I deployed it through an external server cluster, secured, encrypted, and registered under my own private entity. A parallel backbone. One they depended on. One they never owned. Every data validation, every system relay, every critical safeguard passed through Sentinel before reaching its destination. It wasn't just supporting the infrastructure, it was the infrastructure. And legally, it was mine. I kept it undocumented, not out of secrecy, but out of necessity. The less people knew, the less they could misuse. Even Elena, who once shadowed me for months, never questioned the anomalies, the ghost alerts, the silent corrections that kept everything running smoothly. She trusted the results. They all did. Until Adrian arrived. He didn't understand the system. He didn't need to. In his mind, companies were charts and hierarchies, things you could restructure, replace, optimize. People were variables, and I had just been removed from the equation. I looked back down at my phone. The activity log was already updating. Minor latency shifts, authorization delays, internal routing inconsistencies small enough to ignore, but precise enough to matter. Sentinel had recognized the trigger condition. Unauthorized termination, hostile environment, protocol initiated. I exhaled slowly, watching the data scroll. This wasn't sabotage, it was response. They believed they had removed a liability. What they had actually done was disconnect themselves from the one system that had been quietly holding everything together. And now, piece by piece, it was letting them feel the difference. 2 days later, the message arrived. Not a call, not a meeting, an email. Subject line: Role adjustment notification. I read it once, then again. Effective immediately, your position is being restructured into a temporary advisory role under the CTO's supervision. Temporary. Advisory. No team. No authority. No decision-making power. They hadn't just removed me. They had rewritten me. When I returned to the building that morning, my badge still worked, but only on selected floors. The access logs had been stripped down. My title had been replaced with something sterile and forgettable. Infrastructure consultant temporary. No office. No nameplate. just a shared desk in a quiet corner of the second floor, tucked between storage cabinets, and an unused printer that hummed louder than it functioned. It was deliberate, not removal, erasure. Meanwhile, Adrian was busy building his version of the future. Posters appeared overnight, sleek designs with empty promises. Reimagining scale, next-gen architecture, rebuilding the core. I recognized the language. They had pulled it straight from my old system reports, but now it was being used to dismantle the very thing it once described. Later that week, the company hosted a town hall. Everyone was there, engineering, operations, marketing, a full display of alignment and optimism. Adrian stood on stage like a man unveiling a masterpiece. Today, he announced, we introduced the team that will lead Virex into its next chapter. They stepped forward one by one, young, confident, impressive on paper. Most of them had followed him from his previous company. One of them stood out immediately. Lucas Venn, late 20s. Perfect posture. The kind of confidence that comes from never having seen a system fail under real pressure. By the third day, I found him in the server staging room. He was holding a tablet, frowning slightly at the screen. "Hey, you're Rowena, right?" I nodded. "Quick question," he said, turning the display toward me. "This cluster here, no label, no activity logs for months. Safe to archive, I didn't need to look twice. It was one of Sentinel's decoy structures. A deliberate misdirection layer. Harmless on the surface, critical beneath it." "You shouldn't touch that," I said evenly. "It's tied to legacy processes." He smiled. Dismissive. Casual. "I already queued it for deletion," he replied. "We're cleaning out outdated clutter." Of course he was. Efficiency without understanding. Confidence without context. I didn't argue. I simply stepped back and let him proceed. What Lucas didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Sentinel had been built for exactly this kind of interference. The moment his command executed, the system responded. It cloned the entire structure into a shadow environment, masked the original, rewrote the access logs. From his perspective, the deletion was successful. From reality's perspective, nothing had changed. Sentinel had protected itself. And the company. Again. I walked out of the room without saying another word. Behind me, Lucas tapped confidently on his tablet, believing he had just improved the system. That illusion wouldn't last. Elena passed me in the hallway later that afternoon. For a brief moment, our eyes met. There was recognition there, but it faded quickly, replaced by something more convenient. Professional distance. She nodded politely. Not as a colleague, not as someone she once trusted. Just acknowledgement. Then she kept walking. I had taught her everything she knew: how to trace broken logic, how to question clean data, how to look beyond what a system shows and understand what it hides. And now, she stood beside the people replacing me, as if history could be rewritten just by ignoring it. They weren't just replacing experience with inexperience. They were replacing depth with appearance, substance with presentation. And for now, they were getting away with it. But Sentinel was still running, still watching, still correcting every mistake they didn't even realize they were making. The illusion of control remained intact, because I allowed it to. That afternoon, I received an all-staff calendar invite. Subject: Innovation Sprint, Rethinking the Backbone. I almost laughed. They were about to present a future built entirely on something they didn't understand, and something they didn't own. The presentation hall had been rearranged overnight. Rows of chairs faced a large projection screen glowing with polished slides and carefully curated phrases. The lighting was softer than usual, almost theatrical, as if the company was trying to convince itself this was more than just another internal meeting. I took a seat in the back. Not because I had to, because I preferred it that way. Unseen, uninvited, unnecessary. At least, that was the role they had assigned me. People filled the room quickly. Conversations buzzed in low tones, a mix of curiosity and quiet tension. Everyone knew something had shifted in the company, even if they didn't have the words for it yet. Then Adrian stepped onto the stage, confident, composed, in control. Today, he began, we take the next step toward a smarter, faster, more scalable future. The words landed exactly as intended, clean, empty, convincing. He introduced the new system architects, and Elena walked out beside Lucas. She looked different under the stage lights. More certain. More aligned with the version of the company Adrian was trying to build. Together, she said into the microphone, we're moving beyond outdated legacy frameworks and building something truly modern. Outdated. Legacy. I almost smiled. Because every system they were demonstrating was still being held together by the same architecture they were dismissing. Mine. They clicked through slides showing diagrams, workflows, simplified dashboards. Everything looked sleek, optimized, efficient. But beneath it all, the routing logic was unchanged. The validation layers were still active. Sentinel was still there, filtering, correcting, stabilizing. They just didn't know it. And that was the only reason the demo worked. Lucas stepped forward, holding a remote, moving through the technical explanation with effortless confidence, until he made a mistake. A small one. He misnamed a key component. Called a subnet scheduler something it wasn't. It was subtle. Most people in the room wouldn't notice. But I did. And for a brief moment, instinct took over. I raised my hand. Not to challenge. Not to embarrass. Just to correct. Just to keep the system honest. Elena saw me. Her expression shifted for a fraction of a second before settling back into something controlled. Rowena, she said, her voice smooth, amplified across the room. We appreciate you being here. A pause. But since you're no longer part of the active architecture team, let's allow the current leads to continue. The room went quiet. Not shocked. Not outraged. Just still. I lowered my hand, nodded once. No argument, no reaction, because there was nothing to say. They had made their position clear, and everyone else had chosen to accept it. I stood up slowly and walked toward the exit. No one stopped me. No one spoke. The door closed behind me with a soft click that sounded louder than anything that had just happened inside. The hallway was empty, silent, the kind of silence that doesn't comfort you but isolates you. I walked to the corner lounge and poured myself a cup of coffee. The machine sputtered as it filled the paper cup, the sound oddly grounding. I sat down on a worn bench nearby, staring at the surface of the liquid without really seeing it. That moment replayed in my head. Not the words, not even the dismissal, but the absence of resistance. No one had questioned it. No one had hesitated. 18 years reduced to a polite exclusion. Across the hallway, someone shifted. I looked up. A young intern stood there, frozen in place, phone still raised slightly in his hand. He had recorded it. Not intentionally, perhaps, but enough. Our eyes met. He flushed quickly, lowering the phone before walking away without a word. I didn't stop him. I didn't need to. By the afternoon, the clip had already begun circulating internally. I overheard fragments near the elevators. Did you see what happened? They shut her down mid-presentation. That was rough. Whispers. Observations. But no one approached me directly. No one asked if I was okay. The company had perfected something far more effective than confrontation. Silence. Clean. Controlled. Untouchable. I finished my coffee, slowly letting the bitterness settle. Then I pulled out my phone and opened the Sentinel dashboard. The system logs updated in real time. Unauthorized terminology usage, misaligned configuration attempts, minor access inconsistencies. Nothing critical. Nothing visible. but enough. Enough to tell me everything I needed to know. They were standing on a system they didn't understand, pretending it belonged to them. And slowly, very slowly, it was beginning to respond. I closed the dashboard and sat there for a moment longer, letting the weight of it all settle into something clearer. Not anger, not humiliation, something sharper, something focused. They had chosen to erase me in public, to reduce me to silence, and for the first time since that meeting, I realized something important. I didn't need to prove anything to them. The system would do that for me. That night, the city felt quieter than usual. Or maybe it was just me. I drove home without turning on the radio, letting the silence fill the space instead. Streetlights passed in slow intervals, reflecting briefly across the windshield before disappearing behind me. Everything outside looked normal, predictable, stable. Inside, nothing felt that way. When I stepped into my apartment, I didn't turn on the lights. I dropped my bag by the door, slipped off my shoes, and walked straight to my desk as if my body already knew where I needed to be. The laptop screen flickered to life. For a moment, I just stared at it. Then I opened a new email. Subject line, formal resignation. My fingers hovered above the keyboard before I started typing. To whom it may concern. The words came easily. Polished, professional, detached. A version of myself that knew how to leave quietly without friction, without consequence. I am submitting my resignation effective immediately. I paused, read the sentence again. It sounded clean. Too clean. Like it belonged to someone who had already accepted being erased. I continued typing anyway, finishing the paragraph with a brief note of gratitude and a closing that carried no emotion at all. Then I stopped. My hand rested on the trackpad. One click. That was all it would take. Send. End it. Walk away. I sat there longer than I expected, staring at the message as if it might change on its own. It didn't. Instead, something else surfaced. Not anger, not even hurt. Just a quiet question. Was this really how it was supposed to end? I exhaled slowly and pressed backspace. One line disappeared, then another, until the screen was empty again. I closed the email without saving it. Not yet. Not like this. Not while everything they built was still standing on something they didn't even understand. My hand moved almost instinctively to another window. The Sentinel console opened with a soft glow. Familiar. Controlled. Unquestionable. The command line blinked once, waiting. One input. That was all it would take. A single line could dismantle everything. Every layer. Every safeguard. Every silent correction that had been protecting their system for years. I could remove it completely. No more support. No more stability. No more invisible backbone holding their structure together. The company wouldn't just struggle. It would collapse. My fingers rested lightly on the keyboard. Ready. Capable. But they didn't move. Because I knew exactly what that would mean. It wouldn't just affect Adrian, or Elena, or the people who chose silence. It would ripple outward. Clients, teams, people who relied on the system without ever knowing my name, people who trusted the results even if they never saw the work behind them. Destroying it all would be easy. Too easy. And for the first time that day, I felt something heavier than anger. Responsibility. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling, letting the tension settle into something clearer. I didn't want to burn it down. I wanted them to understand. To feel what it meant to lose something they had taken for granted. There was a difference. A precise one. I returned my gaze to the screen and cleared the command line. Then I shifted to the activity logs instead. That's when I saw it. An alert. Unauthorized access attempt. Timestamp 8:14 p.m. Origin internal network. I leaned forward slightly, my focus sharpening. That wasn't routine. Not at this level. I opened the detailed trace. The request was masked behind a spoofed identifier, but the structure was careless. Whoever initiated it had tried to disguise their access, but they didn't understand how deeply Sentinel recorded everything. I followed the trail. It took less than a minute. The system never forgot. It never guessed. It knew. User trace resolved. Elena Ward. My jaw tightened, but I didn't react immediately. I just stared at the name on the screen. She hadn't just replaced me. She was trying to take control of what I built. Rewriting access layers. Testing authority she didn't have. Trying to step into a system that was never designed to accept her. Years ago, I had stood beside her when she made mistakes no one else saw. I had taken responsibility for things she wasn't ready to carry, protected her, guided her, taught her how to navigate systems that didn't forgive carelessness. And now she was doing exactly that. Careless, ambitious, blind. I didn't open a message. I didn't confront her. Instead, I opened a secondary terminal. My fingers moved with quiet certainty, not to attack, not to destroy, but to watch. Command entered, trace enabled, shadow logging active. Sentinel responded instantly, monitoring initiated. I closed the laptop slowly and sat back in the dark. The room felt different now. Not heavy, not uncertain, focused. They thought removing me meant removing control. They thought they could step into something they never built and make it their own. They were wrong. And soon, they would realize exactly how wrong they were. If you think I made the right call by not destroying everything, choosing instead to monitor Elena in silence and let the truth reveal itself step by step, then I want to hear from you. Drop a 1 in the comments if you would have handled it the same way. The next morning, the message from HR arrived at exactly 8:15 a.m. No greeting, no name, just a short instruction. Please schedule a time this week to collect your personal belongings. A security escort will be provided. I read it once and set the phone down. 18 years reduced to a scheduled pickup. Still, I replied with a single sentence and chose the earliest time available. Not because I was eager, but because I didn't want anything left unfinished. By the afternoon, I was back at Virex Systems. The lobby felt brighter than usual, almost artificial. People moved through it the same way they always had, but something in the air felt thinner, like the building itself was holding its breath. I gave my name at the front desk. A few minutes later, a man in a navy blazer approached me. "Ms. Chase, I'm Daniel from security. I'll walk you upstairs." His tone was polite but distant. We stepped into the elevator together. Neither of us spoke. The silence wasn't awkward, it was procedural. When the doors opened on the third floor, I felt it immediately. The space had changed. Not dramatically, but enough. Desks rearranged, screens upgraded. My office door. No longer mine. A different name was already there. I didn't stop to read it. My things were packed into a medium-sized cardboard box and placed on a side desk just outside the room. Not even inside. Just waiting. I walked over slowly. Daniel stayed by the doorway, giving me space but never stepping too far away. Inside the box were the expected remnants. A ceramic mug with a faint crack along the handle. A few notebooks filled with handwritten notes no one else would understand. A framed photo of my father and me on graduation day. And a small flash drive I hadn't used in years. I picked it up, turning it slightly in my hand, trying to remember when I had last seen it. Then I set it back down. There was no rush. I checked the desk drawers even though I knew they had already been cleared. The top one was empty. The second one held nothing but dust. But the bottom drawer resisted when I tried to open it. Slightly jammed. I pulled harder. It slid open with a soft scrape. Something had slipped behind the panel. A yellow folder. Worn at the edges. Thicker than it should have been. I pulled it out carefully and opened it. My breath slowed. Inside were pages of hand-drawn diagrams, layered structures, node connections, redundancy loops, Sentinel, the original architecture. Drawn years ago, long before the company ever understood what it was. In the corner of the first page, my signature, Rowena Chase, dated, undeniable. I ran my fingers lightly across the paper, feeling the indentations where the pen had pressed harder on certain lines. This wasn't just memory, it was proof. They could remove me from the building. They could rewrite my role. But they couldn't erase this. They couldn't recreate it. And more importantly, they couldn't claim it. I closed the folder slowly and placed it at the bottom of the box beneath everything else. Protected. Where it belonged. When I straightened up, Daniel shifted slightly. "Ready?" he asked. I nodded. We walked back through the hallway together. Past people who once depended on me, past conversations that stopped the moment I passed. No one spoke. No one needed to. The company had already said everything it intended to say. At the elevator, I pressed the button and waited. The doors opened. We stepped inside. The ride down felt shorter this time. Or maybe I just wasn't measuring it the same way anymore. When the doors opened into the lobby, Daniel finally spoke. "Take care, Ms. Chase." I met his eyes briefly and nodded. "You too." Then I walked out. The air outside hit differently. Sharper. Real. I adjusted my grip on the box and moved toward my car. Halfway there, my phone buzzed. I paused and pulled it out. A notification from Sentinel. Inactive admin protocol detected. Countdown initiated. Time remaining 3 hours. I stared at the screen for a moment. I hadn't triggered it. Not manually. But Sentinel understood context. It knew the difference between leaving and being forced out. I locked my phone and continued walking. This time, I didn't look back at the building. I didn't need to, because whatever came next had already begun. By the time I got home, the sky had already shifted into a muted shade of gray. I placed the box on the table and stood there for a moment, staring at it without opening it. It wasn't just a collection of objects. It was 18 years condensed into something I could carry with both hands. I set it aside. There would be time to process that later. Right now, something else mattered more. I opened my laptop and accessed the private Sentinel console. The interface loaded slowly, then settled into its familiar stillness. Clean, controlled, uncompromising. A status bar appeared. Phase 1 scheduled. Access layer disruption pending. Time remaining 2 hours 47 minutes. I leaned back slightly, watching the countdown tick down second by second. Everything looked stable on the surface. That was the point. Sentinel wasn't designed to destroy, it was designed to reveal. I opened the override panel and entered a new sequence of commands, each one precise, each one intentional. Not enough to crash the system. Just enough to shift it. Permissions would begin to misalign. Users would log in successfully, but access would fail on the second step. Internal processes would slow by fractions of a second, barely noticeable on their own, but disruptive when compounded. Emails would queue without sending. Dashboards would load incomplete data. Financial confirmations would stall just long enough to create doubt. Individually, nothing critical. Together, impossible to ignore. I executed the sequence. Sentinel responded instantly. Protocol accepted. I switched to live monitoring. The first signals appeared within minutes. A payroll API delay. Retry initiated. Then a login loop from a regional manager. Timeout. A data sync mismatch in financial reporting. Flagged. I watched each event unfold in silence. No alarms. No visible failures. Just friction. Subtle. Persistent. Untraceable. Across the system, things were beginning to feel off. Inside Virex, they would notice soon. Not panic. Not yet. Just confusion. I closed my eyes briefly and exhaled. This wasn't revenge. It wasn't about watching them fail. It was about letting them feel the absence of something they never appreciated. I stood up and walked to the window. The city lights flickered on one by one, unaware of the quiet shift happening inside a single building across town. Behind me, the console continued updating. More logs, more inconsistencies, more signs that the system was no longer operating the way they expected. I returned to the desk and entered one final command. If admin reset attempted initiate decoy environment, if they tried to fix it, Sentinel would give them something clean, something harmless, something false, an illusion of control. Meanwhile, the real system would continue to shift beneath them. I closed the laptop gently. The room fell silent again, but it wasn't empty. It was waiting. Tomorrow they would begin to notice. And once they did, there would be no way to unsee it. The first real signs appeared just after 9 a.m. I didn't need to be inside the building to know. Sentinel told me everything. From my apartment, I watched the logs update in real time, each entry small on its own. Together, they painted a clear picture: payroll access failures, login loops across multiple departments, internal messages delayed or disappearing entirely. Nothing catastrophic, just enough to disrupt rhythm. Inside Virex, it would feel like something was slightly out of sync, like the system was hesitating. By 10:30 a.m., the issues began to stack. The CRM platform stopped syncing properly. Client updates lagged behind actual activity. Orders appeared incomplete even when they had already been processed. Someone would have tried refreshing, then restarting, then escalating. I could almost hear the conversations without being there. Try again. Give it a minute. Is this happening to anyone else? By noon, they stopped asking questions and started calling meetings. Sentinel logs confirmed it. Multiple access attempts, diagnostics running across different layers, none of them reaching the core, because they didn't know where the core was. I watched as Elena's credentials appeared again and again in the activity feed. She was trying to trace the issue, jumping between systems, requesting access to directories that hadn't been touched in years, looking for something familiar, something she could understand. But Sentinel didn't operate on familiarity. It operated on precision. Every time she got close to something meaningful, the system adjusted, redirected, obscured, not blocking her, just guiding her away. By mid-afternoon, the pressure had escalated. A company-wide meeting was triggered. I didn't need audio to understand the tone. The logs told me enough. Increased admin activity, simultaneous access requests, emergency overrides, all signs of a system under stress, but still no direct path to the problem. Then something unexpected happened. At 3:04 p.m., a new name appeared in the logs. Felix Tran, Junior Systems Engineer. His access level was limited, but his actions were different. Careful. Methodical. He initiated a deep trace scan on the CRM pipeline. Not surface level. Not reactive. Intentional. For the first time that day, I leaned forward. His scan picked up something unusual, a relay command buried deep within the transaction buffer. Unindexed. Unlabeled. Not meant to be seen. Sentinel. He tried to open it. Access denied. He tried again, this time with a partial override. Sentinel paused, then responded. Secure credential required. Voice signature mismatch. Felix hesitated. I could almost feel it through the silence of the logs. He wasn't rushing. He wasn't guessing. He was thinking. Then he did something most people wouldn't. He checked the origin, the creator, the name tied to the system. The log updated. Credential owner R. Chase. Archived. I didn't move. Didn't breathe. For a brief moment, the system had revealed a piece of the truth. Not enough, but more than anyone else had seen. Felix couldn't go further. His access level wasn't sufficient. Sentinel closed the path, returned him to the main console. Clean, seamless, as if nothing had happened. But something had. He had seen my name. And once a question exists, it doesn't disappear. I leaned back slowly, letting the moment settle. They were getting closer. Not to control, not to understanding, but to awareness. And that was the first crack. The next morning, the tone inside Virex shifted. Not confusion anymore. Pressure. Sentinel's logs reflected it instantly. A surge of activity. Admin-level access requests spiking across multiple departments. Emergency permissions being granted. Internal systems being probed more aggressively. They had stopped guessing. Now they were reacting. At 8:20 a.m., a new set of encrypted access credentials appeared in the system. External. That was new. I traced the origin. A cybersecurity firm based out of Washington, D.C. Adrian had escalated. He wasn't trusting his own team anymore. He had called in specialists. The goal was obvious. Find the problem, contain it, reset everything. I leaned forward slightly, watching as the external team began their work. They started with standard diagnostics, network scans, traffic mapping, identifying bottlenecks. Everything by the book. Clean, methodical, professional. For a moment, I wondered if they might actually see it. Not just detect the issue, but understand it. That thought didn't last long. Within 20 minutes, their approach shifted. Deeper scans, more invasive. They weren't trying to understand the system. They were trying to force it open. One of them stood out. Jared Maddox, lead engineer based on his access ID. His methods were sharper than the others, less cautious, more direct. He isolated a hidden thread buried beneath the analytics engine. Not Sentinel itself, but close. Closer than anyone else had gotten so far. I felt it immediately. Not fear, awareness. He flagged it, escalated internally. Then he started writing custom scripts. Bypass attempts, layered intrusion patterns, testing the edges of something he didn't fully see. The first attempt failed, blocked cleanly. The second one pushed further. Sentinel responded with minor reroutes, warnings, invisible ones, the kind that told you to stop without saying it out loud. Jared didn't stop. On the fourth attempt, his script brushed against something real, a fragment of Sentinel's outer structure. I held my breath without realizing it. For a brief moment, the system paused, calculating, evaluating. Then Jared made his move, a brute force simulation, aggressive, impatient. He wasn't trying to understand the architecture anymore. He was trying to break it. That was his mistake. Sentinel didn't react emotionally. It didn't panic. It responded exactly the way it was designed to. Access anomaly detected. Unrecognized authority. Response initiated. In less than a second, Jared's credentials were erased from the system. Not blocked, not suspended, removed. Every access point, every permission, gone. The logs updated instantly. User not recognized. Session terminated. From Virex's perspective, it would look like a system failure. From Sentinel's perspective, it was correction. I exhaled slowly, tension I hadn't acknowledged finally releasing. He had been close. Closer than anyone else. But still, not close enough. Inside the building, I could imagine the reaction. Confusion turning into concern. Concern turning into fear. Their external expert had just been locked out of the system completely. No explanation. No warning. Just gone. Sentinel logs reflected the aftermath. New alerts. Internal escalation. Adrian issuing temporary lockdowns on admin access. Elena attempting to reroute diagnostics back to internal teams. Too late. The narrative had shifted. This wasn't a glitch anymore. This was something else. Something intentional. Something they couldn't control. I stood up and walked toward the window. Morning light stretched across the city, calm and indifferent. For the first time since everything began, I allowed myself to feel something different. Not satisfaction, not victory, clarity. They had spent years believing they owned the system, believing they controlled the foundation. Now they were being forced to confront something far more uncomfortable. They didn't even understand it. And they never had. Behind me, Sentinel continued running. Silent, precise, unyielding. And somewhere inside Virex, for the first time, they were starting to realize it. It didn't take long for them to change tactics. By Thursday afternoon, the system logs had quieted slightly, but not because things were improving. It was the kind of quiet that comes before something more deliberate. Then my email notification appeared. Subject line, Notice of Legal Inquiry, Virex Systems. I opened it without hesitation. The document attached was formal, structured, carefully worded to sound neutral, while carrying a clear accusation beneath every sentence. They didn't name me directly. They didn't have to. Unusual system behavior traced to legacy-level processes maintained by a former employee. Potential unauthorized access and malicious interference. Violation of post-termination compliance. Each line pointed in one direction. Me. I read the document twice slower the second time. Not because I didn't understand it, but because I wanted to feel exactly what they intended. Pressure, intimidation, control. They had failed to fix the system, so now they were trying to assign blame. My hands rested calmly on the desk. There was no panic, no urgency, just a steady awareness of how predictable this move was. They couldn't explain what was happening, so they chose the simplest narrative. Someone must be responsible, and the easiest target was the person they had just removed. I leaned back slightly and stared at the screen. For a brief moment, I let the anger surface. Not explosive, not reckless, just present. They had taken my work, relied on it, erased me. And now they were trying to turn me into the problem. That part almost impressed me. Almost. I closed the email and stood up. The room felt different now. Sharper. More defined. I walked to the table and opened the box I had brought home from the office. The yellow folder sat exactly where I had placed it, untouched, waiting. I pulled it out carefully and opened it again. The pages hadn't changed. They didn't need to. Hand-drawn architecture, layered logic, every line intentional, every connection deliberate. And at the bottom, my signature, dated. Years before Virex ever claimed stability as part of its identity. This wasn't just a design, it was origin, proof of authorship, proof of ownership. I ran through everything else in my mind: the external server registration, the hosting metadata, the private deployment structure. Every decision I had made back then, not out of paranoia, but out of foresight. I had never given them control. I had only given them access. There was a difference, a critical one. I walked back to my desk and opened my laptop again. Not Sentinel. Not yet. This required something else. I pulled up my contacts and selected a name I hadn't needed in years. My attorney. She answered on the second ring. I didn't explain everything. I didn't need to. I forwarded the document, then the blueprint, then the supporting files. Silence followed for a few seconds. Then she spoke. They just made a very serious mistake. Her tone was calm, certain. This isn't just a weak claim, it's exposure. I felt something shift inside me. Not relief, not satisfaction, alignment. For the first time since the email arrived, I knew exactly where this was going. They're trying to pressure you into backing off, she continued. But they don't realize what they're actually accusing you of. I didn't respond immediately. I didn't need reassurance. I needed clarity. And I already had it. Prepare the response, I said. Keep it direct. No threats. No emotion. Just facts, evidence, truth. She agreed. The call ended shortly after. I closed the laptop and sat still for a moment. They thought this was about control, about forcing me into silence. But they had misunderstood something fundamental. I wasn't hiding. I had simply never needed to prove anything. Until now. Across the room, the yellow folder rested quietly under the light, unchanged, unshaken. And for the first time since this started, I realized something with complete certainty. They hadn't just lost control of the system, they had just stepped into a fight they couldn't win. The investor meeting was scheduled for Friday morning. It wasn't meant to be dramatic, just a routine update. At least that's what Adrian had planned. From my side, I didn't need an invitation. Sentinel was already connected to the shared audit environment Elena had uploaded for transparency. She thought she was providing clarity. What she actually did was open a window. At exactly 9 a.m., the meeting began. Faces appeared on the screen one by one. Investors from different time zones, different backgrounds, all watching with the same expectation. Stability, control, confidence. Adrian stood at the head of the room, composed, measured, performing. He spoke about temporary disruptions, framed them as minor technical inconsistencies during a transition phase, used words like optimization, scaling, friction, short-term instability, the kind of language designed to soften reality. Some of them nodded, others didn't. Then a voice cut through the presentation, calm, direct. Who owns Sentinel? The room shifted. Adrian paused. Just for a second. Excuse me, he replied. Buying time? The system, the voice continued. Is it proprietary to Virex, or is it externally developed? I recognized the name on the screen. Daniel Harrow, senior partner. Not someone who asked questions without already knowing part of the answer. Adrian adjusted his posture slightly. It's an internally developed legacy system, he said. Maintained under our infrastructure division. A clean answer. Confident. Wrong. A brief silence followed. Then Daniel leaned forward. That's not what I was told. Every screen seemed to focus at once. Elena stopped typing. Adrian's expression tightened. I had a conversation 3 years ago, Daniel continued, with a systems architect from your company. She described a relay structure that matches exactly what we're seeing now. He paused. Rowena Chase. My name landed in the room like something they couldn't ignore. Not implied, not avoided, spoken. Attached to the system, to the architecture, to the truth. Adrian didn't respond immediately. He couldn't. Because this wasn't speculation. This was recognition. Daniel continued. She explained it as the nervous system behind your operations. Something invisible, but essential. I remember it because it was one of the most precise system descriptions I've ever heard. A few investors exchanged looks. The tone had changed. This wasn't about performance anymore. It was about ownership. So I'll ask again, Daniel said. Who owns Sentinel? Adrian's control slipped just slightly. It's part of our infrastructure, he repeated. But the certainty was gone. Then why? Another voice added. Does its architecture not match your documented systems? No answer, because there wasn't one that would hold. I watched everything unfold from my screen. Every hesitation, every shift in tone, every moment where confidence gave way to uncertainty. This wasn't collapse, not yet, but it was exposure. And once something is exposed at that level, it doesn't disappear. Elena finally spoke, her voice quieter than usual. We're still reviewing legacy integrations, she said. There may be undocumented components. Undocumented systems don't control core infrastructure, Daniel interrupted. Silence. Heavy. Unavoidable. I leaned back slightly, letting it settle. For the first time since all of this began, they weren't just feeling the absence of control. They were questioning whether they had ever had it. Adrian tried to recover, shift the conversation, redirect the focus. But it didn't matter anymore. The question had already been asked. And more importantly, it had been heard. The meeting ended earlier than scheduled. No conclusions, no reassurances, just uncertainty. The kind that lingers, the kind that spreads. I closed the monitoring window slowly. The room around me was quiet, still. But something had changed. Not in the system, in perception. They had spent years believing they understood the foundation they were standing on. Now they knew they didn't. And once that realization begins, there's no going back. The offer came 2 days later. Not from a corporation trying to recover. Not from a company chasing headlines. From a small, growing startup in Boston. The message was simple. No long pitch. No corporate language. We're building something that deserves to last. We want you to build its foundation. I read it once. Then I accepted. There was nothing left for me at Virex. Not after everything that had been revealed. Not after the illusion had finally broken. I didn't announce my departure. I didn't send a message. I simply moved forward. This time without hiding. We rebuilt Sentinel from the ground up. Stronger, cleaner, transparent in the ways it needed to be, protected in the ways it had to be. For the first time, I wasn't the only one who understood it. My team didn't ask how to sell it. They asked how to make it better, how to protect people, how to make sure it would never be misused. And for the first time in years, I wasn't carrying it alone. Meanwhile, Virex began to unravel, not all at once, but steadily. Investor confidence dropped. Project stalled. Leadership shifted. The same people who once spoke with certainty now spoke carefully, quietly. Because once the foundation is questioned, everything above it becomes unstable. I didn't watch it closely. I didn't need to. Some outcomes don't require observation. They simply follow their course. One evening, I stood on a rooftop overlooking the city. The air was calm, the skyline familiar. In the distance, I could see the Virex building, still standing, still intact, but no longer untouchable. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel satisfaction. Just clarity. They had tried to erase me, but they never understood something simple. You can remove a name from a system. You can rewrite roles, titles, histories, but you can't erase the person who built the foundation. And eventually, the foundation speaks for itself. If this story resonated with you, share your thoughts below. Have you ever been underestimated? Only to rise stronger. Like, comment, and subscribe for more stories like this. Because sometimes the quietest power is the one that outlasts everything. I've learned that true value doesn't come from recognition, but from knowing what you've built and who it truly helps. There will be moments when you're overlooked, replaced, or even erased, but if what you created is real and meaningful, it will eventually speak for itself. What matters isn't revenge, but having the strength to stay grounded and not lose your humanity even when you're treated unfairly. If you've ever felt underestimated, remember you don't need to be loud to prove your worth. If this story made you reflect, consider subscribing, leaving a comment, and sharing this video. A small action from you could help this story reach someone who truly needs it, maybe even helping them find their strength at the right moment.